Zach Burley here. Welcome back to episode 3, the fall 1914 turn of my Paths of Glory playthrough. So I'm going to show you the two hands for the sides, and then we'll get underway. For the central powers, we have Russian reinforcements, Cleave, Rape of Belgium, Russian cavalry, French reinforcements, British reinforcements, and severe weather. So a combat card, some reinforcements which they'll need, a VP card which will be useful, and another combat card along with some more reinforcements. So not a bad card, gives you some options. For the central powers, we'll be going first. We have Kaisertreu, combat card, chlorine gas, combat card, Mata Hari, which will be probably useful, Libyan Revolt. Probably going to hold off on this one until the Turks come into the war and let these forces down in Egypt leave first, and then play it, drop it in behind to be annoying. Tsar takes command. We have not even made any progress on the Eastern Front, so this isn't useful yet, but this probably is a reminder to do some more on the Eastern Front. Austria-Hungary reinforcements and German reinforcements. And remember, the Central Powers are in limited war, but the Allies are not. The current the current war status is 4 for the CP, 3 for the Allies, 7 overall. And let me just check. Yeah, they do have a card that can get them into the next stage. So they will be in limited war next turn. Well, it's going to be the Central Powers first as always, and I'm going to play the Libyan Revolt card for the operations point. And there was a bit of a mix-up on the Western Front, just bad management on my part. I'm sure an experienced player would never make this mistake. But as I'll zoom in here to show you what we're gonna do here. But this is the situation, and there's one big problem. That the road to Paris is completely open. Now, as the Allies were playing their cards last turn, they never they never had a card that was useful to play as a replacement card. Well, now, anything would have been useful at this point, but as they were going, they really just didn't have a card that made sense to use for replacement. So that would have allowed them to place a corps, at least, into Paris to help with this. I think one of the last things that the Allies did, the CP did, was move into Cambrai. The Allies should have went around and reinforced there. So the Central Powers are going to complete this Schlieffen plan move, the swing around the French left, as well with a little attack for extra boost. So they're going to move the Second Army, and this is a bit risky because it might not actually work, and if it doesn't work, then, well, this is all going to be a pretty bad result. And then it'll be a attack from Brussels and Sedan. Into Cambrai. So we're going to have to do the move first. They get 3 movement points. And they're going to go 1, 2, 3 straight into Paris. So the swing works just as in Schlieffen's plan. Not enough forces to defend this flank. And so falls Paris into the hands of the Germans. Now, in the end, this isn't really a success of the Germans, it's just failure of the Allies, but that will bump the victory points up to 18. So they're only 2 away from getting a victory here just on the 3rd turn. And now the other one is the attack. It will be a flank attack attempt to really try and bust through these lines. The Germans will get a +1 on this die roll. It's a 4, +1, it's a 5. That is enough to make this flank attack work. So the Germans will roll first. Theirs is a 4. There's nothing in the hex no terrain or anything like that, or trenches. So it'll just be a straight up 4 on the Army fire table under the 10 column. So 10 and 4 is 4. So the BEF has to take losses first. So they'll be reduced by 1. I'm not sure if they have to take all of them or if they just have to take the first one. I don't really know, honestly. But let's just say that they have to take all of them. That would be 2, because we only have, out of the 5, we only have 3 left. So we could hit the Belgians. I'm pretty sure the Belgians would take the next hit after that. You know, it will reduce the Belgians. And if that's wrong, I'll check in the rules and fix that next. So that is your full 4. Oh, well, actually, if it's 4, that's 2. We don't have enough to reduce this one. So that leaves us with 2, which means these 2 corps have to go. So forget that I said that. This Belgian corps will be left to retreat. And, well, they have to roll first, I should say. They're going to have 2 hit points to roll with. So they get a 6 on the Army fire table of 2. 2 and 6 is 3, so not bad. And the Germans are going to reduce the 5th Army, and this is a little bit risky. But they want an army to advance into Cambrai, obviously, and they don't want it to be the one in Sedan. So they're going to reduce that army, and since the Germans won the combat, they will have to retreat, and I believe it's only 1 space. So they will move into Chateau Thierry with the French, and then Cambrai will fall as well to the Germans. So a pretty nasty attack, and they turn the flank just as in Falken's plan, and rather in Schlieffen's plan. So we'll see how the Allies respond. That puts the victory points up to 19. So I'm guessing if it gets to 20, it's an automatic victory. I think that's what the rules are. I'll check that just to be sure. So if they just get 1 more, it's all over. But of course, the redeeming factor here is that the British are up in Great Britain, ready to come down and take away some of these victory points. But they're going to have to do it soon, otherwise this could be the end of the game here just early on in 1914. Alright, back with the Allied play here. It's going to be Russian reinforcements for the ops points. They're going to use all 3 of them here to strike back on the Western Front with 2 attacks and a move. So it's going to be an attack here, an attack here, and a move for the forces in London, and we'll go ahead and do those. I wasn't exactly sure if you could land in an enemy-controlled space. I assume you could. I just didn't know what the combat rules were for that if there was an enemy force there. I'm not even going to worry about it though. I'm going to land in Le Havre for 1, and then I also looked to see if there was any movement restrictions between these spaces. It doesn't appear as though there are, so we'll just count it as 1 space. It's 1, 2 for everybody, and then 3 into here to retake Amiens and cut off this unit. And I also had to remember that you have to besiege Paris still, it's not captured. And that the VPs went down 1. And also that if you do get to 20, you don't automatically win. You have to hold on to it to the war status phase. So they would not have won even if they would have gotten 1 more. Immediately, that is. So still 2 more if we're here. We could go 1, 2 into Calais. Just don't really have too much interest in doing just yet. like they may leave. Kind of like this. I can't imagine that the Germans would go for that rear there, but we'll leave a corps behind just in case. Now for the attacks. It's going to be the French forces in Verdun against Sedan, and the French. Actually, now that I'm doing this, I can't activate these two because there is a Belgian group there as well. So that's too bad. But the French forces will continue with the attack on Sedan. They'll have to because they are the mandated offensive country for this side. And so the Allies will get one more, and I think they're going to shift an army. They're going to move the first army out of Nancy and go with 3. They could move into Chateau Thierry or Melun. That's a tempting one. I think they may go with this and then try a flanking attack next time. But we'll continue on here. It's not going to be a flank attack, it's just going to be straight up. It's going to be, I believe it's going to be 4-on-3. The results are 5-2. And it is 4 against 3, by the way. So the Germans on the army fire table are on a 3, and they roll a 5, which will be, if I can get that to you, a 3. So they will just reduce the army. And then the French with 4 will do 2, which is not enough to damage. So the attack is a failure, and they have somewhat exposed themselves to a counterattack from Metz and Sedan, but I don't know that the Germans will be able to muster that, because this attack is, I don't want to say going to backfire, but they've really overstretched themselves here. They had to know that the British were going to come in, so the front will likely stabilize, and it could result in the loss of a German army if they're not careful. So we'll have to see what the Germans decide to do. Alrighty, so since last time, the British have moved in and cut off supply to Paris, so the Germans are going to try and remedy this by taking Chateau Thierry, relinking supply. At this point, they're not incredibly concerned with keeping Paris. They're on 18 victory points at the moment. There are 2 easy ones to grab in Russia. If Belgrade falls, there's another one. And there are other places they can pick them up from. So they're not terribly concerned that they're going to lose out on this advantage that they have. At this point, actually, they're kind of switching, whereas the Allies earlier wanted to be the ones digging in. Now it's kind of the Germans. They want to preserve what they have, dig in on the lines they've acquired, and then just hopefully see out to a victory. They're hoping by the end of the turn. The Central Powers definitely think they can get this done by fall. The Allies, of course, are going to try and stop them, but it all begins here with the attack on Chateau Thierry, which is going to be a 2-pronged attack, neither of which can be, though they won't get the bonus for flanking, so the decision has to be made of whether or not they're still going to do it, and it's kind of a tough one because they need to reopen this supply connection. The Second Army is in desperate need of supplies, so I don't know, it's a tough one, of course, if you get to hit first, but you know what, we're going to do it. we're going to try for the flank attack here. No bonuses. Just straight up. Alright. Barely. The die was teetering off to the side on the edge of the rule book, so it's a 5. They just do manage to get it. That means that the Germans will roll their hits first. It's on the army It's in the army table, excuse me. It's going to be a 10 strength, and they will roll. And it's another 5. So 5 on the 10 will be 5. So that's enough to reduce the 6th Army. I'll have to look. I think actually the Belgians take losses first. So let's go ahead and hit them for 3. That leaves 2 left over, and neither of them can be dealt. So it'll look like this, a full strength army, and then the Belgians. Which like I said, I'll check just to be sure when I go off camera, but I think the Belgians have to take hits first. And so now the French will get to fire back. They're going to be firing back on the 4 of the army fire table. So even if they roll a 6, they won't do enough to beat the Allies. I mean, the Central Powers 5. So either way, the Central Powers will be breaking through here and reestablishing that supply line connection. It's just a matter of how it'll look. So they rolled a 3. On the 4 will be 3. So that's enough to reduce an army. So that's where it gets. This is where it gets interesting for the Germans. They can do one of 2 things here. They can abandon Paris, reduce the army in Cambrai, and move into Château-Thierry. That is one option. The other option is abandoning Cambrai, reducing the army in Paris, the second army, which allows them to keep the siege going, but will, of course, weaken this area in northern France and Belgium. There would still be a connection through Sedan here, so they won't have to worry about being cut off again. But I'm not really sure what the strategic move would be here. I think it's to abandon Paris. I think that, that's great and all to have the capital, but I think that if they can solidify that Paris can't hold, so they're going to abandon Paris. They're going to reduce the First Army in Cambrai. The forces in Château-Thierry will divide. I think the loss factors were 2, because they rolled 3 and a 5, so they'll have to retreat 2 spaces. I think they can split up in their retreats, which is what they'll do. The Belgians will go to Melun, and Bar-le-Duc will be where the 6th Army occupies. So now the full strength army can move in. We'll get the control marker in Château-Thierry. And Paris is, abandoned by the French. Let's say they scorched the city and left. Still hadn't broken through that blockade, so maybe just a heavy bombardment. But that reopens up the supply lines. It leaves the Germans in a bit of predicament still in the north, because the Germans, are vulnerable to a flank attack there from the new British corps and armies. So, of course, they're going to have to reinforce Paris, but we will see what happens. Alright, so I have jumped ahead a few turns here, but let's go ahead and see what's happened on the Western Front since then. So, as it stands right now, the Germans have kind of decided to call it quits, collect what they have, and focus themselves elsewhere at the moment. So what happened was, of course, they abandoned Paris and reinforced Brussels, because the British moved into Paris with the Second Army, and then moved a corps up to Ostend, retaking Calais and Ostend to knock the victory points down a few. And so they've reinforced here and are kind of just sitting and waiting for the Allies. They, of course, moved the British in. They've got the 10th Army reinforcement for the French, and that allows perhaps the British to come up here and hit a flank attack around on Cambrai or Brussels and kind of help turn the flank backwards. For the Germans, they've also gotten reinforcements into Berlin. They've got the 10th Army as well as 2 corps. But the action now, for the first time in this game, is on the Eastern Front. So the Germans moved a corps out and took Pluk, Lodz, and is now besieging Warsaw, which is allowed in 1914 because it was unoccupied. So they can do that. Now the Russians are trying to hit back and first of all, draw some attention away, but also there are some victory points up here for grabs if they can knock out this 8th Army. So one thing I forgot a second ago was that there is no connection between Lonza and Intersburg, because I wanted to make it a 3-pronged attack, but I couldn't do it. So instead, the 2nd Army will march into Tannenberg. This has been done before. And they're getting a bit risky if they want to go all the way here. But that would force the German army upwards, should they decide to go that way and not take a step loss. But I think that we're going to move in and go in for Königsberg. I'm pretty sure that trench goes away whenever you enter it in. It might stay because I'm only besieging the fort and not actually taking the space. So I'm going to leave it for now. Double check off camera. But I'm going to go with for now that it stays because I have not actually taken the space. So the penalty will still take effect. I think that makes the most sense. But I'll double check. Now the main attack will happen here between Kovno and Grodno, excuse me. I will eventually figure all these out. It'll be a 2-pronged attack, and the Russians, it's a tough one because they would like to do a flank attack, but it's disastrous if it doesn't work. Much worse than if it happens in some other places, because there's such a thin line on the Eastern Front that if anything goes wrong, then it just kind of falls apart. They're going to be conservative. They're not going to do a flank attack, but they do have this combat card, Pleve, played, so they will get a +1 to their attack for the turn, or for the duration of this attack. So it's going to be 5 on 4. The roll comes in, and it is not good for the Central Powers. That is 6 and 1, complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So the Russians will be firing on the 4 army table at a 6. The Germans will be firing on the 5 firing table at a 2, which will definitely be interesting here. So a 5 will reduce the 8th Army by 1, and then they would have to be reduced again, but they can't. So the Russians will take 2, which they would like to take from this corps, I believe. The one nice thing is that they reduce the army. They still have 2 units here. But if they leave the army, then they are even on, well, they actually have an advantage with, well, the corps would be gone. So they would actually be even as far as combat goes. But I don't think the Germans are going to try and rush in. So we're going to eliminate this corps for the full 5. Or for the full 2 they had to take, excuse me. Now the Germans is interesting because they have to retreat 2 spaces. If it was going to be 1, I was going to retreat here to keep that army alive. But now they have to retreat 2 spaces. As far as I can tell, the only area they can go is up here into what I believe is Western Lithuania or Latvia. Anyways, I just don't really want to do that. So I think we're going to reduce the 8th Army 1 to stay here. I believe they can draw supply from this way, but I'll check that as well. But they're going to stay in that location and get rid of the 8th Army. So that definitely changes up the balance on the Eastern Front. Now the Germans wanted to move the 10th Army and those 2 corps out west, but I think they're going to have to SR those to the Eastern Front to stabilize things there. And as is very historical, I don't think that we're going to be able to wrap this up by the end of the turn. I don't really know how much there will be left in this one, but there's 17 victory points for the Central Powers at the moment. I know that the Allies have the Rape of Belgium card in their hand, so that's going to reduce it 1. There might be a victory point or 2 to fall one way or the other, but I don't think it's going to be enough. So, as is historical, I don't think that this is going to be coming home as the leaves turn for fall. I think this is going to be a much longer conflict. So, we will run through the turn and see how the Central Powers respond. Alright, so on the Eastern Front, things have taken a bit of a turn here. The Germans brought in the 10th Army into Danzig and then to Insterburg, and the 2 corps moved into Warsaw, and then into these 2 Russian forts here, Lanza and Brest-Litovsk, which of course plays a big role. And so what that basically does is, we're on the last card here now. The Allies are going to have to abandon the army besieging Königsberg. They can't SR out of there because you can't SR a army by sea, and plus they don't control it anyway, so there's no way. If they were to launch an attack on Tannenberg, they would win there, but they would have to launch then another attack here. They could try a 2-pronged on Insterburg, but it just, in the end, they're gonna stay there. They're not gonna do enough, so they're gonna lose that entire army rather than waste a step loss or 2 trying to do the attack. It's gonna be gone permanently, which is bad because it's the entire Second Army is going to be permanently removed from the game for the Russians, and that's certainly not ideal. But that's a mistake on my part, overextending my lines. But of course, the historical example is nothing ever good happens when the Russians go into Tannenberg, so should have avoided that from the start. That brings us over to the Western Front, though, for one final push, and we'll show you who it's by here. So this is the way it looks now. Flip this back over because I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So it looks a bit like this. The French have the Allies have this British reinforcements card, which they're going to use for an attack. Now, the last couple of card plays didn't work out for either of the players like they wanted to. The Germans had the Tsar Takes Command card, and they wanted to use it for the event, obviously, but they didn't meet the requirement, so then they wanted to use it for replacements, but they just didn't have enough time to do it with the other card play, so they're going to go into the turn with no replacements. But neither will the Allies, to be fair. They have to fulfill their mandated offensives because they're kind of on that teetering point at the edge of the latter half of the victory points track, so they do not want to just give away free victory points. So they're going to launch this one final attack. It's a 4 victory points card for the British reinforcements. They're going to activate these 2 spaces, and because there's different nationalities in them, it takes up 4 activations, which of course is not ideal. So it'll be in this space 7 and in this space 4. So that'll be 11 for the attackers and just 5 for the defenders. They will attempt to do the flank attack. Risky, but they'll get a +1. They really want to knock the Germans out. And they get a 4 modified to a 5. It will be enough. So it'll be 11 that they're rolling on here. They get a 4. So on the Army Fire table, under the 11 column, a 4 is 5. 4 is 5. So they will reduce the Second Army once. That leaves them with 2 loss factors, which they cannot do. So now the Germans will get to fire back on the 3 column of the Army Fire table. They themselves will get 5. And 3 on 5 is 3, which means they will have to retreat. And I believe the British have to take the first step loss. So that fulfills the Allied mandated offensive. So the Germans will retreat to Sedan, where there actually isn't a control marker, my bad. And then the Allies will move into Chateau Thierry. Any full strength units can move in. I think that they will advance the 1st and the 10th armies, leaving the 6th to plug a hole here, and the Belgians just to sit around and be Belgium. So that will do it for this turn. We're going to have to do attrition, which I'll go ahead and do on camera. On the Western Front, everybody is fine. Nobody's out of supply. Down south, everybody's good. And then on the Eastern Front is where it gets hairy. All the German units are in supply, but the 2nd Russian Army will be removed from the game. And I do believe that is permanently. I think I'm getting that correct. They are permanently removing the 2nd Army from the game. So back to the box, which is just really bad. Catastrophe on the Eastern Front, especially considering the light amount of forces that now cover that area. It's so funny how fickle this game is, because at one point I'm saying, okay, well, the Allies, the Central Powers are going to be able to win. Next turn, it's like, nope, there's no chance they're going to be able to finish this off. And now I'm kind of back on the track. Well, if they can get some forces out east, I think they can steamroll their way through, get the victory points required, because as it stands, if the 2 sieges fall in Belgrade and Warsaw, they'll be on 18. There's 2 points there. That'll put them into the 20. So they got to hold it on the Western Front, and if Russia collapses, Limburg as well is lightly occupied, so you're saying there's a point. You don't even really need to do all that much. Those cores are free to go, so this really could, famous last words, as I've said over and over and over again, this really could be the last turn coming up. So attrition is done now, and we'll go on to the siege phase, which will apply to Warsaw, these 3 forts, and also in Belgrade, which has yet to fall. Okay, so the siege phase, all we got to do is roll the die, and if it's greater than, I believe, the loss factors, then it is eliminated. And there is no more -2 penalty. That's only for August and September. So we'll start off with Lanza here. So we'll roll a die. It's got to be anything but a 1. So it's a 2. That'll do it. The fort is destroyed. The space falls to the Germans. Now for Brest-Litovsk, they roll a 1, so it holds out. Warsaw, they have to roll more than a 2. Fell off. It is a 5, so it will fall. Warsaw collapses, which means that the Central Powers will add another victory point to their tally, which puts them up to 17 now. The last one they have to work with is Belgrade. Going to remove this marker up here that was on Königsberg. That should have been removed earlier. And Belgrade's the last one. It's held out for the last 2 turns, I believe. And we'll see if it can again. It cannot. The 3 is enough to finally submit the Serbians to defeat. It is destroyed. Still some resistance, though, from the 2nd Army and the remnants of the 1st. But as it stands, the Austrians will move into Belgrade. Move up to 18 victory points now. That concludes the siege phase. We'll get on to the war status, which brings us over to the victory points track. The Allies leapfrogged the Central Powers. We're now at 9 combined war status. Both sides will be in limited war next turn. The victory points are at 18. And all we have to do is the replacement phase after this, which there are none for either of the sides, so that's done. And then we'll get to draw the cards and all that stuff. So as it stands, a general overview. Things are teetering for the Central Powers. They went into the turn very confident and then took a major loss on the Western Front. Thought they were going to take a major loss on the Eastern Front. Are able to turn both of them around somewhat and actually come out with a pretty positive result that puts them on the cusp of victory. They're just a strike into this area up here and retaking a victory point in Limburg, and they're done. So it's probably going to be dig in on the Western Front, hope to hold and seal it next turn for the Allies. You know, they've put off so many reinforcement cards trying to just do stuff. They're going to get that whole new limited war deck, though, so they're hoping that there's an arsenal in there that they can latch on to and be able to bring something out that can puncture the line, retake some victory points. There will be a -1 because of the blockade in the winter turn, so maybe that is what keeps the Allies alive for another turn, but it's going to be a close call here. Opening up another front with Italy would be great because the Austro-Hungarians have really done nothing this game. The Russians are still strong on the Austrian front, and the Serbians are holding them up. So opening up that new front would really help out a lot, I would think, for now at least. Maybe they can grab a victory point space or can at least make it more difficult to manage because there's just a lot of fires to put out in this game. Okay, well, that is it for the fall turn of 1914. We cross over into the next year. It is the winter turn of 1915.